My fiancé's family couldn't wait to end our engagement. What was once a warm welcome into their home had turned into cold indifference. "I'm sorry," he said one evening, avoiding my gaze as we sat in the pristine living room of his family's estate. His mother sat beside him, a picture of quiet satisfaction, her perfectly manicured hands resting on her lap. "Sorry," I repeated, gripping the edge of my chair. "That's all you have to say?" His mother sighed as if she were the one burdened. "Dear, you must understand. These things happen. Your family's situation has changed, and it's simply unrealistic to continue this engagement." I turned to him, my voice laced with desperation I hated showing. "But we love each other." He flinched at my words, but his silence was more painful than anything he could have said. His mother reached out, gently patting his hand. "Love is one thing. Reality is another." Then she looked at me, a sharp contrast to her faux gentle tone. "You wouldn't want to hold him back, would you?" "Hold him back?" I stared at him, waiting, hoping for even a hint of defiance for him to say no. "I want to be with her no matter what." But all he did was lower his head, his fingers clenching against his knee. That was my answer. A hollow laugh escaped my lips as I stood. "I see." His mother smiled, pleased with the lack of a fight. "I knew you'd understand." But I didn't. Not really. And as I walked out of that house, out of that life, I knew one thing for sure. No one was going to save me. I would have to do it myself. Yes, my family went bankrupt. I had no time to grieve. There was no use in lamenting over what was lost. I had to act. My fiancé's family couldn't wait to end our engagement. What was between us was not enough for him to fight for us. That disappointment should have broken me, but I pushed it aside. My priority was saving my family. I went to every major bank in the city, pleading for a loan. I was turned away more times than I could count. Some outright laughed at me, others rejected me with feigned sympathy. The walls of opportunity were closing in, suffocating me. And then there was Eric. He was not much older than me, yet he carried an air of power and control that made him seem untouchable. When I walked into his office, he barely spared me a glance. His voice was cold, clipped. But he listened. He read through my carefully drafted business plan, flipping through page after page in silence. I held my breath, watching his sharp, handsome features remain unreadable. When he finally looked up, his deep eyes met mine and he asked, "Can I trust you?" I nodded. "Yes. My family and I will do whatever it takes to recover. All we need is time, some cash flow to keep us afloat." His gaze lingered on me, something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. Then, leaning back in his chair, he asked in a quiet, almost casual voice, "And what do I get from this?" My stomach clenched. His words sounded ambiguous, like he was waiting for something, like he had been waiting for me. "You'll get high interest on the loan," I answered firmly. A slow, knowing smile played on his lips. He lowered his head slightly as if amused by my answer, then dismissed me without another word. I thought I had failed. But the next day my assistant rushed into my office, barely able to contain her excitement. "The bank approved the loan," she announced. I nearly collapsed in relief. From that day on, I met Eric frequently, at his request. He demanded regular progress reports, his cold and professional demeanor never wavering. At first, the meetings were strictly business. He would sit across from me, his eyes scanning my reports with precision, nodding occasionally, correcting small details when necessary. Then one day he offered me coffee. It was a small gesture, but coming from Eric, it felt unexpected. He had always been distant, all business, no warmth. But that day, as I sat across from him, nervously flipping through my report, he stood up, walked to the coffee machine in the corner of his office and poured 2 cups. Without a word, he placed one in front of me before returning to his seat. I stared at the cup for a moment, then at him. "Thank you," I murmured, unsure of what to make of it. He didn't respond, just sipped his own coffee, his eyes scanning my report like nothing had happened. But I noticed the way his fingers tapped lightly against the desk, as if he was waiting for something. Maybe for me to take a sip, to accept this silent truce between us. Another time he suggested lunch. "You're always rushing in and out," he remarked as I was gathering my things after a meeting. Have you even eaten today? I hesitated. I had breakfast. He raised an eyebrow. That was probably hours ago. Then to my surprise he grabbed his coat. Come on. I followed him out, confused but curious. We ended up at a quiet high-end restaurant not far from his office. It wasn't a business lunch, he didn't ask for reports, didn't even bring up the loan. We talked. Or rather, he asked about me. How did you come up with your recovery plan? He asked, resting his chin on his hand. I blinked at him, surprised by the interest in his voice. I stayed up for days researching, calculating, making sure I wasn't just throwing empty promises at you. His lips curved slightly. I could tell. Something shifted in that moment. Little by little, the rigid lines between us softened. The meetings that once felt like interrogations became discussions. He would sometimes linger after I gave my reports, making small comments about unrelated things. A book he had read, a recent investment he was considering, even the weather on particularly gloomy days. It was subtle but undeniable. The cold, untouchable Eric I had first met was changing. And maybe so was I. One evening, after months of working tirelessly to restore my family's company, I walked into our usual meeting, ready to present another update. But this time, Eric wasn't behind his desk. He was standing by the window staring out at the city skyline. When he turned to face me, his gaze was different. Have dinner with me, he said, his voice steady but gentle. It wasn't a question. That night changed everything. Our relationship unfolded naturally. What began as cautious companionship turned into something deeper, something I hadn't dared to hope for. I saw sides of Eric that no one else did. His rare, boyish smiles, his quiet moments of thoughtfulness, the warmth hidden beneath his composed exterior. The day my family's business fully recovered, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Overwhelmed with joy, I turned to Eric and threw my arms around him, pressing a kiss to his lips before I could stop myself. He didn't hesitate to kiss me back. Months later, on a night illuminated by city lights and the warmth of something more profound than mere gratitude, Eric got down on one knee. I knew about you before you ever walked into my office, he admitted. I noticed you at an event long before you came to me for help. And when you finally did, I thought, he let out a quiet laugh, that maybe it was fate giving me another chance. Tears blurred my vision. I had come to him desperate and broken, thinking I had nothing left. But in the end, I found something far greater than what I had lost. I found him. And this time neither of us would walk away.